Here we are on lesson 14, dividing decimals by a whole number. Okay, so we're going to use the standard algorithm from now on. You'll see it's very similar. Now we just have a decimal that we need to put in place. So here for number 1, we have 4.03 divided by 5. Our setup is going to be the same. So you're going to want to leave some room. So we'll have 4.03 on the inside. On the outside, we'll have our 5. So the first thing you always want to do is you always want to bring up your decimal point. So that's what I'm going to do first. Don't forget about it. Alright, if you want to leave it to the end, you might forget. So now we're asking ourselves, how many groups of 5 go into 4? And we know that that's 0. Alright, so you're going to want to put a 0 now because we're talking in decimals. So now if we look at this whole number here, we're looking how many groups of 5 go into 40, and we know that's 8. So if we subtract 40 then, we end up with 0, and then with 3. So again, we ask ourselves how many groups of 5 go into 3, and we know that that's 0. You need to put the 0 up here. You can't just skip it for now. So we're going to subtract 0, and we are left with 3. So now we know that this is a decimal. So on decimals, we know that after any numbers, it's just zeros that continue on forever and ever. So we can throw in a few zeros here. And I'm going to bring this first one down. And we ask ourselves how many groups of 5 go into 30. And we know that that's 6. So if we subtract 30 then, we are left with 0. And that means now that we are done. So our answer up here would be 0.806. Alright, let's look at number 2 here. We have 143.2 divided by 5. So, same setup. Leave a little room here. 143.2. 5 on the outside. Bring up that decimal point. Don't forget about it. So now, we know that 0 groups of 5 go into 1. You don't have to put a 0, so we're going to move over to 14, and we're going to look at this. And we know that 2 whole groups of 5 go into 14, so we're going to subtract 10. And we are left with 4, and we bring down the 3. We ask how many groups of 5 go into 43, and we know that's 8. 5 times 8 is 40, so we subtract 40, and we are left with 3. We bring down this 2 now. And we're looking how many groups of 5 go into 32, and we know that that's 6. So we subtract 30, and we are left with 2. So now we need to add a 0 and bring it down. And we know that 4 whole groups of 5 go into 20, and if we subtract 20, we are left with nothing. So that means that we're done. So our answer here would be 28.64. Alright, moving on to number 3 here. We have 0.1895 divided by 8. So our setup here is the same. 0.1895. Our 8 goes on the outside. Alright, and then remember to bring up that decimal point. Most important part. So we know that 0 groups of 8 go into 0, so we can go ahead and put a 0 here. And now if we look at the 1, we know that 0 groups of 8 go into 1 as well. So that means we're moving on to looking at the number 18. And we know that 2 groups of 8 go into 18. So we are going to subtract 16. And we are left with 2. Now we bring down this 9. And we know now that 3 whole groups of 8 go into 29. So we are going to subtract 24. We are left with 5. And we bring this next 5 down. Same thing, how many whole groups of 8 go into 55? And we know that 6 whole groups of 8 go into 55, and 6 times 8 is 48. So we'll subtract 48, and we are left with 7. We're going to have to add a 0 and bring it down. How many whole groups of 8 go into 70? And we know that 8 whole groups can go into 70, and 8 times 8 is 64, so we'll subtract 64. We are left with 6. Add another 0. Bring it down. So now we're looking how many whole groups of 8 go into 60. And we know 7 whole groups can go into 60, and 7 times 8 is 56. So if we subtract 56, we get a 4. Add another 0, bring it down. And now we sigh finally with relief because we know that 5 whole groups of 8 go into 40. And we subtract 40 and we are left with 0, so that means we are done. So our answer would be 0.0236875. Alright, so sometimes you just have to stick with it and you'll see the end eventually. Alright, looking at number 4 here, we're going to have the same setup. Leave some room at the top. We'll have 2.5683 divided by 6. Bring that decimal point up. And then we know that 0 groups of 6 go into 2. So we put a 0. So now we look at the number 25 and we know 4 whole groups of 6 go into 25. So if we subtract 24, we are left with 1. We bring down the 6. Now we know that 2 whole groups of 6 go into 16. So we can subtract 12. We are left with 4. Bring down this 8. We know that 8 whole groups of 6 go into 48. We subtract 48. We are left with 0. But we are not done yet. Alright, we have to bring down this 3. We know that 0 groups of 6 go into 3. So we put our 0. Subtract 0. We're left with 3. Now we're going to have to add a 0. Bring it down. And we know that 5 whole groups of 6 go into 30, so if we subtract 30, we are left with nothing. So our answer would be 0.42805. Alright, so even though we ended up with a 0 here, we still had a 3 up top that we had to bring down. So you're not done until you get a 0 at the bottom and there's nothing left over at the top. Okay, we're going to skip number 5. I want you to try number 6 on your own. Alright, look back at your notes, try this one on your own, and then we will go over it all together in class.